Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Maxwell Construction, who has been our sponsor since the very beginning. For over 30 years, Maxwell has delivered the highest quality projects by holding to their core values of customer satisfaction, positive attitude, respect, and excellence. So if you have any kind of commercial construction need, give Maxwell Construction a call today at 812-537-2200.
Welcome to Rock Solid Radio. Hey, this is Merle Hutchinson, the janitor at Rock Solid Families.
You're
At least that's what Linda called me last week.
You're admitting to it now.
Well, I came to listen to our show last week and ate a little humble pie and realized that I'm actually pretty proud of being a janitor around here. I'm good with it.
Good with it. You know, if you haven't checked out last week's show, I really encourage you to do so you understand where that came from. But we had a show on cancel culture, which we really felt was an important one on just the hypersensitivity and the fragility of our culture and our kids. And so we're going to continue to talk about that today, actually.
Yeah, it was an important topic. It continues to be on both sides of that, of whether something's being canceled or something maybe shouldn't be canceled. There's both sides of that where we need to just wrap our head around it. But hon, I'm telling you, this topic this week, you did the primary part of the research on this, mostly because it's in your counseling realm a whole lot more than mine. And so I kind of said, take it, run with it. So I'm going to be kind of your background. Not that I'm not involved with a lot of this, but you see it firsthand. I also get to see it from a parenting perspective a lot, but you're seeing it actually with the folks that you're working with. And so we're going to talk about something. And with this being said, we want you to listen all the way through the show. Okay. Yep. You may not agree with a whole lot that we talk about or anything, but you may be right in step with us. And what we're trying to do is we're searching for ways to help. Yep. And we're trying to do it through God's Word. And so we are going to tackle the subject today of gender confusion, okay? And so,
specifically in our kids.
And parenting those kids, okay? Yeah. So understanding that, and we'll keep circling back around on some of that. But help us out a little bit with what you're seeing coming in the office and just some of the terminology and all these different things that you're dealing with, and just help give us some clarity.
Well, before we do that, hon, we definitely want to put some disclaimers out there, because we know that people are coming at this from all sides with all different kind of backgrounds and foundations. And so we at Rock Solid Radio and Rock Solid Families are coming from it from a biblical worldview, which means that God is our Heavenly Father. Jesus Christ was His Son who died in our place, that we are all sinners. We were made in God's image, male and female. Okay. He created us in His image, but that we are fallen creatures because of this fallen world we live in. There is this thing called sin that we all have in our hearts that we do, okay? But that gender and sex from Genesis 1:27 is this one and the same thing. Right. And it wasn't until the 1970s that we started to separate sex and gender. And that's where the confusion is coming in for our kids and for our families and for adults who don't understand how to navigate this. This isn't what they grew up with. And so we are just really working through that premise, okay? So if we still want you to listen, even if you don't come from that background, okay? Because we believe that there's some healthy things in dialogue here for our kids.
And Hannah, I do think it's worth us saying that we just didn't arrive at our biblical view. Like, this is the one we think looks best, so we'll choose it. So I think it's important that people understand that there is much research and data and just life proof that indicates that God's nature is what it is. I mean, and that's why we arrive at it. And so for many years, many of us, self-included, tried to contradict it, tried to say, oh, well, I don't know if that's quite the way. And I think it was really our work with kids and then with parents in our counseling world that we live in, that we became more and more committed to, oh my gosh, God's word does means something. It does. And so that's how we became rock solid families.
Right.
And so just to know that we didn't just willy-nilly arrive at the biblical worldview because we were brought up that way. Well, we've arrived at it much more through oh my gosh, this is proving itself out in the way that we live.
The healthy alternative.
The way that works. It's God's nature, right?
So, and for decades and centuries, people abided by this, that they knew that sex and gender was one thing and you didn't choose it. Now, through this social construct over just the last 30, 40, 50 years, that all of a sudden people think they have this choice and these options, which, by the way, hon, I don't know if you know, but I tried to find like the latest amount, but we're up to 112 different gender types. That was the biggest number I found. And just years ago, it was like 50, 60. And so it changes. And I've heard people say it's fluent, it's fluid. And I'm like, okay, that's confusing.
That is confusing.
It's hard for our kids.
Right. And so especially when you have kids, well, we're going to talk about this too, like their brain is already confused with a lot of different things. And so we're going to get into that. But as we talk about this, one of the things that you and I are committed to do is ultimately to help families, ultimately try to stick to God's truth the best that we have learned it and it's been taught to us and we've reasoned it through, okay? But to do it with love and respect.
Yes.
And so by no means, that's why we want you to listen to the show all the way through, because this is not about, well, what these people need to start doing is, you know, that's not what this is about, because nobody wins in that situation.
No, especially our kids.
Yeah, and because that's why, hon, talk about what you see a little bit with the desperate behavior coming out of our kids.
Yeah, and honestly, even though gender dysphoria has been scientifically researched to be a very small, minute population long term that was like 0.016 and it was mostly males.
Right.
That's not what we see walking in our doors. We see a large percentage of young prepubescent or pubescent girls who are in this tidal wave. We're going to talk about the tsunami that's kind of knocking them over and pulling them in to something that they're not familiar with, they don't understand, and they don't know how to combat.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. It's not just in big cities. It's not just in, you know, the left side. It's in every town.
Yeah.
Because of the World Wide Web.
And it's in every family, whether it's in your house directly or your relations.
Your kids are seeing it.
So we want to let's thank a few sponsors, do a few announcements, and let's get into the subject here. So Rock Solid Families and Rock Solid Radio would like to thank KC Outdoor Solutions and Maxwell Construction for being partners and sponsors with Rock Solid Radio. So we want to thank these guys for coming alongside of us, encouraging us to do what we do, and ultimately allowing us to encourage you as parents to do what you're doing. So we want to thank these guys for continuing to come alongside of us.
Yeah, and as we said last week on our Cancel Culture show, we know that there's going to be a lot of people that view this that do not agree with us, okay? And as we've said in last week's show, it's important in how we disagree. It's important on how we treat people with dignity and respect, even if they're on the other side of the political aisle, even if they're on the other side of this racial divide, this sexual identity divide, that we got to show our kids that's not how you handle disagreement. That's not how you handle conflict and confusion. And so we really encourage you to dialogue with us. Like if you have something that you want us to hear about your opinion or whatever, you know, shoot us an email, you know, comment on our show. We want to dialogue with you, but we want to do it with dignity and respect.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Very good.
So let's talk a little bit about, as we said last week's show, this is an emotionally charged subject, and we've been talking about wanting to do it for a while. And so we know that it can push buttons, but as you said, hon, we exist to help strengthen families and children, especially.
And I should say, hon, to do that for the long haul.
Yes,
for the generational pattern that we see. And so sometimes when we deal with parents, we see them doing what they think is best in that moment.
Yes.
And whether that's giving their child what that child wants in that moment, maybe that creates peace or whatever. But trying to play it out. Okay, so how's that going to look long term? And so that's why sometimes some of the suggestions we give might be a little bit harder to take because you're like, oh, I know if I did that in my house, it's not going to go over well. Yeah. No, but maybe if we continue to work that, what will it do long term?
Yeah. And, that's a great point, hon, because we're not just talking about gender confusion. We're talking about everything from premarital sex to when they start drinking, when they start getting high, when they're allowed to stay up out all night. Those are the things that are risky behaviors for any child in any town, in any family. And so, hon, I got caught so much in the weeds in some research. Oh my gosh, hours and hours and hours.
You did. I lost you a few evenings.
Holy cow.
Like, where's Linda?
The CDC every year does a youth risk behavior survey. Okay, the CDC, we've heard a lot about the CDC with COVID,
yes, we
right?
have, yeah.
And so every year they go into the high schools and they survey certain behaviors anonymously, so kids can be as honest as they can. And they ask questions about drinking and drugs and sex and all those kind of things. And so, in the 2020 CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 9.5% of youth 13 through 17 identified in the LGBTQ community, okay? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look back 10 years and see how much it's increased.
Right.
Could not find that data. And here I've come to find out they didn't ask that question 10 years ago.
Right.
So in 10 years, the CDC has recognized that this is a risky behavior that they didn't see it 10 years ago.
In teens. Remember, we were talking about this sort of thing with adults, but not in the teen population.
Right. So I did hear a statistic that I was going to use, but I was like, I want it for the United States. But in the UK, they did ask this question 10 years ago. And in 10 years in the United Kingdom, there has been a 5,000% increase in children with gender identity issues, identifying in the LGBTQ community in 10 years, 5,000% increase, okay? And so that number is staggering.
Yeah.
So it's interesting what it would be like in the United States if we had that kind of empirical data to compare it to. But why the jump? That's the question.
Right. So like in any sort of science work that we do and we see a marked change, a significant change in the data, then you have to ask, okay, why?
Yeah.
What is going on here? So, hon, I mean, you and I we kind of have our ideas and sometimes good or bad, you have ideas, you kind of hope you're wrong. Yeah. But more and more, we do find that we're right. And it's just because of what we see, what we actually get to experience. So, hon, what are you finding? Like, what are the things that they're actually saying, oh, there's a direct correlation?
Well, like you said, hon, we had our hunches. But what I've done and what we've done in the last months is that we've really researched the data. We've gone out there and looked and talked to all sides and really looked at like what are some of those. And there's not just, I think, one answer. Okay, it's because some people believe that it's because there's more youth coming out because they feel more comfortable, that it's more accepted, that maybe those children, that 5,000%, they were all in the closet and that they've all come out because they feel safe to do so.
Right.
I disagree with that. But some would say that's why. The culture, some of that.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is I could agree with a level of that because the actual family structure looks different. Maybe we're only being parented by mom or by dad. And so there's a whole different parenting dynamic that's going on that might allow that more easily.
So I shouldn't say I disagree with that. I disagree that it's that 5,000% jump is all because of that.
Because of that, yeah.
Maybe it's because of the widening of the circle. As I mentioned before, Adam and Eve were created male and female. We had two genders. Okay. Now we're up to 100 plus. Okay. And so maybe it's because we've widened the circle and included all different kind of gender types and it's continuously evolving. As you mentioned with our kids the other day is that, now we're even up to animalistic gender types, like where we're identifying with animals. And, that's becoming part of the gender.
Well, I mean, and that was in our high school. Okay. And honestly, like referencing as furries, and kids dressing and acting the part of a certain
I don't
animal.
know if that's included in those 112.
And I don't think it is, but the point is that these sort of the identity to something other than who they are is very attractive.
And as we talked about last week on our show with this cancel culture, I think there's an incredible reach and impact. The people accessing social media platforms, there's this tremendous power and momentum that is swooping up our young folks.
Right.
And we think that's a large majority of what we're seeing in this 5,000% increase, is that this social construct has changed to making this almost like the accepted way of fitting in.
Right.
Like if you're marginalized or bullied or feeling socially outcasted, that this is the place where you can belong and come be part of us has really taken off.
Yeah. Well, Hannah, it speaks to the tsunami wave idea that, there was a time back in prior to the 80s, before there was such a thing as an internet, we used to always talk about fashion and style. It always kind of took place first out on the coastal areas, whether you're on the New York or the LA area, and it would slowly sort of ride this wave. And about 3 years later, get over here to Indiana. Okay. And so we are kind of behind the times in some areas. But those days are gone, because what might be hip in New York City today, within seconds, is worldwide. And that's why we see what gets exciting in a moment, it doesn't have time to dissipate and lose energy. And in fact, it actually has time to accumulate. And that's like a tsunami wave, right? A tsunami wave is that whole idea of one big, huge jolt of energy, like from an earthquake under the ground in the base of the ocean, and the floor of the ocean, and that huge insert of energy, and that swells up instantly. And when we see a tsunami wave, it's much, much different than just ocean waves. And so we used to have ocean waves type of styles that would ripple across the country, and some would catch a little more steam than others, and some not. Now, because of technology, and we can't blame the technology necessarily, because we have the ability to harness some of that. But, it doesn't matter whether you're in Southeast Indiana or you're in New York City. We get it all about the same time.
And Mr. Biology teacher, when we talk about the tsunami...
Those days are past me, honey.
But the underlying earthquake, we're literally talking about a shift or a crack in the Earth's surface, the foundation of our world. And that's what we're saying is happening in our homes today, okay? Is that the shaking or the cracking of the foundation in our home is partly to blame for some of this. But we want to put a disclaimer out there first, that we live in a fallen world, that sin is alive, and that you could do everything right. You could be a devoted Christ follower. You could be parenting and have healthy attachments to your children, and they can still choose a gay and lesbian lifestyle. They could still come to be transgender. And so we're not trying to put a finger on and blame you as a parent by any means, okay? Because we know there's a lot of outside factors. There is peer pressure. There is that outside influence. And then there is this parenting style. And so we're going to talk about what we can do, what we have control over in our home.
And can I just touch the phrase, because I think our folks who are not as familiar with maybe what they might consider church speaking or whatever, and you say fallen world. So animals, trees, plants do not work outside of God's world. They're in God's nature. They're in perfect harmony with God. That's like a hive of bees all work together, and we're like, how do they all know what to do? Because they're naturally in the nature of God, okay? We have a choice, and it is often scripted by our fleshly desire. And that's the fallen world, the idea that we get a chance to step away and to appease ourselves. And again, we all do it. That's why we are all sinners, right? Like I might have eaten too much.
So we're not here to point fingers at all.
But it is, now we have to figure out how to manage it and how to get back in step in God's nature. Okay, so that's what that fallen world is about. It's not like some crazy, like, well, what's this fallen world? No, it's just that we get choice. We get to rationally think. And with that comes a huge responsibility. And with that comes our fleshly desire. So I just wanted to kind of clear that.
Good point. And I want us to kind of drill down even further. If you're seeing confusion, gender confusion in your kids, or they're kind of exhibiting some same-sex attractions, let's drill down a little further, because sometimes, most of the time, you've got hurting kids. You got searching, hungry kids who are confused. Maybe they've been rejected by their friends in school. Maybe they've been told they look like a boy or a girl. Maybe they've have a higher voice than their peers. Like, there's so many things, and they're desperately searching for love and acceptance and hope. And so as a parent, we've got to do everything we can in a healthy biblical way to give them that.
And we also see the idea that they don't have the right example to follow. And so when we see a lot of divorce and separation in the house, or we've seen unhealthy adults in the house, why would I want to be a man when the only man I knew was a total jerk and hurt me?
Good point.
And so I actually would want to be away from that. And if I didn't have any good male to sort of follow and get the picture from, it may be even more confusing to me.
Yeah.
Why would I want to be that? So again, there's all of these things come into play here.
Right, yeah. Leonard Sachs is one of my favorite authors on parenting and the health of our children. He was a pediatrician for 4 decades, and he's wrote several books that I enjoy. One of them is Why Gender Matters. And he quoted this Harvard professor, Jerome Kagan, had spent 4 decades studying children, and he finds that parenting style is critical for helping children move out of gender confusion. Kagan says parents who are particularly affirming their cross-sexual identification ultimately have worse outcomes in their child's health and well-being. Did you hear that? So us affirming and like just patronizing their crazy ideas of what they want to be and who they like. You want to be a dog today. If you want to be a girl or a boy, let's change your name. Let's paint your room different. Like, all these different things are not helping our kids.
Right. I mean, and that what you're pointing out, and this is you listeners out there, we want you to hear this. This is not Merrill and Linda saying this. This is kind of, again, this whole idea the data is representing, and it's not about whether what we feel we agree with or not. And we want to say this because we actually see it too when we see it come in our office, and we see that somebody has made the choice as a 13-year-old to go against their biological sex, that things don't get easier. Okay, things get. I mean,
So you're not helping them.
Yeah, so it gets even tougher.
Yeah. So if you see a child who is overly in this gender confusion or overly sexualized in one way or another, moms, we need to carefully guard how much we overprotect them. We've got to stop coddling them, and dads, we got to gently, not shamingly, not naggingly, help them to kind of explore that sexuality that God has designed for them.
Right. So we're going to get into a little bit of what's happening to the body here just through the hormonal changes. But one thing we can all agree on is puberty and teen years are confusing.
Holy cow.
Okay, no matter who you are. The body changes. Like, well, I used to just like being a kid. Why can't I just be a kid anymore? Everything just got complicated. And so with that comes that sort of natural confusion as the brain's trying to develop and the body's handling that. And just as you spoke there, how you as the mom parent, how I as the father parent, we have to be the best representation of our gender so that our kids go, okay, this is what I need to follow. So if this is critical, right? This is why we see people that have lasting problems. We talk about the wound that every man's wound that has been given to him by his father. And that whole idea, where did that come from? Well, because oftentimes us dads, we are either cynical or we are smart alecky or we are rude, and it turns our kids away.
Yeah. Our kids are so confused at a young age about all this stuff, especially puberty. Hun, I can't imagine. My best friend was a girl across the street named Nika, and we did everything together. And I didn't like boys. And if at the age of 12 or 13, I had another girl tell me, oh, well, you and Nika are lesbians or you're bisexual, I don't know how I would have handled that. I think it would have created so much confusion in my mind, because I would have been like, well, you're right. I do like Nika more than I like boys. So does that mean I'm attracted to her sexually? Or is it just because she was my best friend? She was the maid of honor in my wedding. I was the maid of honor in her wedding. It doesn't mean that we were bisexual. But the messages I was getting when I was little was much different than the messages a 12 and 13-year-old is getting today. And it's how we promote or discourage that.
And let's compound that, hun. So you just use the example of just you and Nika. What if I put 3 or 4 more other girls at the same lunch table at school, and all having now instead of having 2 kind of having that conversation, now I've welled that up, and what we are actually seeing is that not only do we have the one girl come in saying I'm having problems and I'm confused. And a lot of times they don't even know it, but then they come in and see, and Linda's already seen one of their friends, and now the next thing you know, we're seeing 3 of them because, they happened to eat lunch together.
Yeah, and this is a great point, because I've had students in my office and I talk about their yard, which is their life, their heart, their mind. And I ask them, who's in your yard? Who's in your head? Who do you listen to? Who's got your back? And for some of these prepubescent or pubescent girls, it's one other girl and they have a girl crush on them. So I'm like, okay, that's the only person you're listening to. That's not a very healthy option right now.
Right.
So we got to put other people in their yard that are healthy and safe for them.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, hun, is we're going to kind of boil down for parents by the way, real quick, some resources, okay? Focus on the Family and Family Life Today are 2 huge biblical resources on parenting and family that we go to for a lot. We encourage you to go to their websites and really just search gender identity, gender confusion. There's tons of material on this, broadcast, podcasts and articles. A friend of mine, Caleb Keltenbrock, also wrote a book called Messy Grace, and he was on the opposite end. His parents both came out as gay. They divorced and both went into same-sex relationships, and so he became a pastor, became a follower of Christ, and so his book is awesome about how do you love people through this, because it's easy to talk about when it's not in your own home and in your own family. So I love Caleb's book and his book Messy Grace, so check that out. And then the last one is the Center of Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, and an author by the name of Preston Sprinkle. A lot of material they put out on this very topic. So all of those resources we would really recommend for you to follow up with.
Yeah. So we want to get into talking about how you as mom and dad, how you deal with these situations. And the reason why it's important is because ultimately we want to help your kids become successful adults. But in the meantime, we see serious things going on. Self-harming at an all-time high. There is an increase of at least 10% suicidal rates among this teenage group. And actually that number is probably a little higher when we even add COVID into that.
Well, it's increased 10%.
Right.
But it's up to 30-40% of our teens who have attempted or talked about suicidal harm. And again, we're not talking about just LGBTQ, but some people would say, oh, that's because they're shaming them or condemning their lifestyle. Even when a child transitions, they still have higher suicide rates. So that's not the solution.
I think that's the point, right?
Yeah.
Right there, you want to, even if after there's been a transition, the issue is still an issue.
Yeah. So our kids may have very healthy bodies, but they have very confused, underdeveloped minds. And hon, I want you to talk about this because this, I think, is huge for parents to understand. Kids at this age cannot make long-lasting adult decisions.
You know, I think some of this kind of drives me crazy, and it drives me crazy because I came through the school setting, and one of the problems that I just saw in the school setting was as legislators kept pumping standards. You know, these kids need to be able to read by this age and by this age, and so on and so forth. These are legislators. They were not educators or psychology people, and they started to miss the understanding of developmental readiness. So, like, I can scream at a 6-month-old child to walk, and you know when they're going to walk? They're going to walk when they're ready, okay? Yeah. Because it takes time, all right? And so what we actually know, we used to talk about Piaget's cognitive development theories, and it always kind of ran through the age of the teen years. But actually, and so everybody thought, well, once you're a teenager, once you're 18, you're complete. And now we know that logical problem-solving skills actually do not even become concrete or more solid until around the age of 25. The frontal cortex is still developing. And that if you take a look at that, that starts to understand why there's high risk-taking in those ages, like from 18 to 25. That's when most guys especially, are going to get arrested. That's when there's most dating. That's when there is just
sexual
high-risk
activity.
behavior. And so, but also, and I point this out because that's also prior to the days of us really talking much about gender confusion. We used to talk a lot about body dysmorphia or associate it more with anorexia. And so that's a confusion. And primarily that was a girl thing, okay? Not that it didn't happen with guys, but primarily we saw it in the girl population. And that is huge during that age span. So my point being here is the brain is trying to figure things out. There's lots of confusing things going on. What I don't want to do is I don't want to cause permanent harm or damage. And so sometimes we have to give them the tools to get through this developmental readiness. This is, I'm not going to give my 3-year-old climbing ropes to jump off of a mountain. They're not ready to do that. I have to continue to teach them how to walk and hike and climb before I give them that equipment. And so we are all of a sudden, we're quickly, they're 13 and they feel like they want to do this.
So we should let them do this.
And guys, it's so harmful. And I'm just saying this from a developmental perspective.
Yeah. I'm going to give you some positive messages, Mom and Dad, because this is a hard topic. And I know that we're hitting really close to home for some of you that are listening. But secular scientific research tells us that gender confusion in kids and teens is usually temporary, that over 80% of our kiddos who show or claim to have this gender confusion as a child will grow out of it as an adult. That's encouraging. And so because of that, we're here to say, let's put the brakes on some of the huge decisions and changes that we're making, whether it be hormones, whether it be body disfiguring, changing, whether it be changing a name legally or calling them by different pronouns or, letting them cut their hair long. Those kind of things some of them are temporary and easy, but some of them are life-changing and altering.
I mean, we're talking one thing about cutting hair. It's another thing to disfigure the body permanently.
I shouldn't have put cutting hair in that, but we've got to be very careful. So we want to finish with some practical things as a parent. If you have a child who comes to you with gender confusion or comes out of the closet to you and they're still living in your home as a child, what can you do as a parent to help?
Okay? So I want to first, you're using the word parent, and that's the word I want to emphasize. Key. You are the parent. And remember that don't be confused by the size of their body. Well, they look like an adult. They're as big as me. No, because like we just referred to before, that the brain and development is still underway. So the idea that you're still in a parenting role.
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing is to take a deep breath and to pause. We don't need to panic either way in terms of, oh my gosh, what happened? Or, oh, whatever you want, honey. Yeah. Okay. So the idea here is to step back and take a breath. Okay. I feel like it's extremely important to educate yourself on this stuff. Yep. No different than when I had a kid come up through my school setting, and all of a sudden we started to see, oh, this child might be somewhere on the spectrum, the autism spectrum. That's not a panic. That's like, okay, let's start to learn about it.
Right, right. So don't make any crazy decisions or comments to push your child further away, because really we need, number 2 is to stay connected to them. This is the most confusing, difficult time of their life. That's the last place they need, is for parents to push away, to kick them out, to disown them, to condemn them. That is just going to push them further and further away from you and healthy habits.
Yeah, I mean, and I will probably put a little bit of that blame a lot on old church people type thinking. Yeah. Well, if you're going to be that way, then you're not welcome in this home. And again, you've lost the availability to weigh into their life and show them the love and respect. That does not mean that you allowing yourself to have a relationship with them is agreeing with them. It means, hey, well, let's help them through this process. Let's
talk about it from a heterosexual point of view. If you had a 13-year-old who became sexually active and had a boyfriend, and they came to you and said, hey, I want to have my boyfriend sleep over, and I want you to put me on the pill, and I want you to let me do this, As an adult, you have the decision to make. Is this a healthy choice for my child? I don't care if they're same sex or heterosex. This is not healthy for them as a 13-year-old. And you as a parent need to speak up and say that.
Right.
Period.
And I would be very reluctant to say yes to that because of the permanent change that can take place there. Remember, this is not a date where we're going to go get an ice cream cone. This is a permanent or a potential for a permanent change, whether pregnancy or hurt or whatever. And so that's why you would say as a parent, no, not a good idea. We're not going to allow it.
So we need to represent Christ well in that moment. You know, the old bracelet, what WWJD, what would Jesus do? You know, I want you to give them the greatest gift as a parent, and that is unconditional love regardless of what they say or what they do. That's what Jesus would ask us to do.
Yeah. Because we're sticking with the facts, we're going to say here, do not encourage cross-sexual lifestyle or even don't encourage the experimentation of it. In fact, what I'd rather you do is let's start to teach our kids the facts. And that's why we're sticking to the facts here and actually in our day-to-day work that we work with. Right? We know we're not right on every little thing, but when we look at what the data is suggesting more and more, so help teach your kids, listen, if this is a route that you're considering, here's how this starts to play out for you. Okay, this is what the data says. So don't encourage like, well, if that's how you feel, then maybe I should just let you do that. That's not parenting.
Right. Encourage and affirm and emphasize their identity in Christ. You know, their relationship with Christ. So many times a kid pushes away from a faith foundation because they think it's one or the other. Help them to see that God does love them, that God does want them a relationship with them, that just because they are maybe tempted by same-sex attraction, that does not create sin. The sin is the action, is the decision to act on it. And so this temptation or this confusion, they're still a child of the King of Kings. He is still wanting a relationship with them. And so please help them understand that this is a natural temptation that a lot of us have in different things, whether it be to drinking or to premarital sex or whatever. Like those are temptations that are out there.
Yeah, good stuff. So another part is a parenting deal is make sure that you are exposing your kids to good, strong, healthy male and female role models. Whether it's at church, whether it's friends, family, that you show them good examples. And that's getting tougher. We know that. We recognize that. And that's why we do talk about affiliating with a church and people of that same belief, because we value, hey, I want men to be men and women to be women, and for good men, good women, okay? And so exposing your kids to those kind of people, and we've talked many times about the men that we had older boys and still continue to have boys, and how we have just appreciated so much the strong men that we knew as friends that are now engaged with our young men. And it's just because your mom and dad, you sometimes you don't have as much clout as you think.
And because mom and dad said so, sometimes they want to do the opposite. But
when you have somebody else that weighs into their life in a slightly different arena, it carries weight.
And so we're talking about healthy attachment patterns. And they may not be seen at home. Maybe you're a single parent. That's where we talked and had big brothers, big sisters on, or talked about Young Life as being a Christian group of brothers and sisters with mentors that are going to speak into your child's life. They need that in their life. So seek them out now. If you're a parent of a young child and you're like fearful of this coming, start that process now. Build a foundation that is unshakable for your kids, that they're going to be able to really pull off of and to refer back to when they get older.
Yeah. So remember, a lot of times when our kids are reaching out for these kinds of things, something else is not right. Okay, so maybe they are being rejected. Okay, so we've talked about before at school that there's always been and there will always be different cliques. Okay, like at this table we have the jocks and at this table we have the band group or whatever. And that's great if you happen to fit or sit at one of those tables.
Right.
What we find is that a lot of these kids don't know what table to sit at.
Yeah,
okay.
good point.
And because of that, it is tough. and they want to fit in. We are social beings, and when we feel ostracized or kept out, we will start to do things to fit in.
Yeah.
And so if that means changing my body, the way I think, then I will experiment with that. And so help your kids with that, to be connected to their strengths, to get them involved in social circles that are healthy, and with people they can identify with, that they can be with.
Stay dialoguing with your kids. Stay in communication. Ask a lot of questions, okay? Don't come down with your judgment, condemnation, okay? Ask a lot of open-ended questions and help them to kind of put a mirror up to see, like, is this making sense? Like, is this working out for me? Why am I doing this? Who is in my ear, really?
Right.
And then I want you to help your kids who are desperate for an anchor to cling to, a place to belong. And again, identity in Christ is the key.
Yeah.
If you drill down past these things they're doing or saying into a place of just belonging and love, being loved by the Heavenly Father, I think you're going to settle it for a lot of kids that are going to feel like, I don't need to do this because I am who God says I am. And that's either male or female.
Yeah, don't confuse it. If you've had a bad experience with what you think is the Jesus thing, chances are, I'll bet you it was a bad experience with a church or religion. And so you
use a person that represented that.
Right. And so you use the word Jesus. And so get down to the nuts and bolts of what Jesus actually did and said, because that is why we subscribe to this belief, and because of him, not because of all of the other things, because they're all flawed, because it's made by us humans, okay? Yeah. But the words of Christ are so loving, but they're so justful. I mean, it's righteousness, you know?
And we've seen that from a lot of parents who maybe didn't have a faith foundation or who were hurt or jaded by the church. And so you can't give your kids what you don't have. So seek out a personal relationship with Christ yourself, and that's going to really trickle down to your kids. They're going to choose that identity in Christ over the 112 different gender types that are out there.
Yeah.
Evolving.
Hun, thanks for doing so much work and research on this. Better you than me. I don't have the attention span to stay with all of that. I would have been like, just be done. But I know it's such a critical topic. And so if we can help you and your family, one of your kids, even somebody that you know, if we can be of help or value to you, please reach out to us. You can connect with us at rocksolidfamilies.org, or you can call the office at 812-576-7625. Please do not just continue to kick this down the road thinking it'll get better. Your kids need help. And as you said, Hun, they're looking for an anchor. They want a connectedness, but it needs to help make sense of things. And so if we can be a step in that pathway, then please connect. You know, just like my friend Caleb did in his book, Messy Grace, you can love your parents or your kids and still love Jesus. It's not exclusive. And so we really are just praying for you. Again, we know that this is a tough subject and we're here to help. And so please reach out. And again, from Merrill and I, we want to thank you for listening to Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community, one family at a time. Make it a great day. Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions. Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. They offer a wide selection of high-quality plants, landscaping materials, and home decor. They do amazing high-quality work and can help you transform your indoor and outdoor living spaces into something beautiful. So stop by Casey's Outdoor Solutions today and let them know you appreciate their support for Rock Solid Radio. Visit Casey's today at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana.